All right. Unit 2 includes chapters 2 and chapter 3. So I've created two different lecture videos to hit a couple highlights that I think need some explanation for what you need to do this week. So chapter 3, catch up, keep my slides caught up here. Chapter 3 both fit in with our Unit 2 strategy and processes, but some of the information in chapter 3 you need in order to answer the discussion question this week, because the discussion question talks about Cleveland Clinic and their Fairfield Hospital, if I get all the terms correct, and they talk about the DMAIC process. So I need to lay out a couple conceptual areas, and then we're going to jump into this DMAIC, and I can explain that I've used a lot of these tools in my own work, so I'm fairly familiar with those. So talk a little bit briefly about this process structure for services versus products. Sometimes the book uses the term manufacturing, sometimes it uses products, but please keep those kind of two things separate. And this framework helps us define those a little bit better. And it's something that, again, you should be using to do your company analysis in your team project. So, and be thinking about, last week we introduced this continuum that had services and products on an arrow. And we talked about if something tends more towards being services, quality is measured instantly. You can't store them. They have to be available immediately for your customer. Training and skill of the person delivering the service is more important than in a product environment. So there were some characteristics of a services world, and then there were characteristics of a product world where we can measure quality separately, and we can kind of take our time doing it, and we can make the product and maybe store it on the shelf in inventory in a warehouse, and then it's ready for the customer to order, and there's less customer contact, so the people that are making the product don't have to have huge customer service skills. They might not have to speak two languages. So there's differences when you're running a process for services versus a process for products or manufacturing. So keep those in mind. And also last week when we introduced that, we said, it's not really a binary choice where you're one or the other. It's a continuum. And, you're mostly a service business, but you have some products, or you're mostly a product business and there are some services. So there's always some blending, but we're trying to kind of unwrap that some. And so this takes it to the next level. This is chapter 3. And process structure for services is, if we're going to be delivering services, what are some things that we should be thinking about? So these are kind of some frameworks. And again, you should be using these to help explain and define the company that you're using for your team project. So customer contact. Clearly in services, we would expect that there's going to be more customer contact. So who's going to be having that contact? Is it going to be by phone? Is it going to be in person? How much training is that person going to need in order to deliver that service? So those kind of issues come into play. How are we going to train them? How are we going to ensure there's quality? Customization. So how customized is the service going to be? And when I think about services versus products, I always like to think about really kind of extreme examples. And so in a service, I think about a haircut, because that is a service, and the person doing it, they're right there in your face. They're kind of talking to you, small talk. They might need to have some language skills. They need to be comfortable with people. They also have to be really well trained, because they don't know what kind of haircut that person's going to want. So, and that's where customization is a great example. When you have a hairstylist or a beauty salon or a barber shop, whatever you want to call that, anything could come in the door. Somebody might want, a crew cut. Somebody might want a traditional cut. Someone might want a fade. Someone might want braiding done. So how much customization are you going to allow, and what boundaries are you going to set on that? We'll do this and this, but we're not trained to do that and the other. So this is some big decisions that you have to make about your frame of what you're going to allow in customization. Process divergence is kind of an interesting perspective, and that is think about as your customer goes through the process. I'm going to go to Chipotle again, and I think about that customer. They come in the door, they get in the line, they get to the first station, then they say whether they want the bowl or the burrito and whether they want a wheat shell or a taco, and they make that decision. And then I think the next thing they ask you is, do you want brown rice or white rice? And then what kind of meat do you want? And then they're doing all that, and then it's what do you want lettuce? Do you want cheese? Do you want avocado? Do you want and it's a linear process that you go through. So there is no process divergence. You kind of go in and you go through the funnel and then you pay and you walk out the door. So that's a linear flow that you see down at the bottom. So process divergence is probably more what you experience when you go to the Motor Vehicle Administration and you need your license renewed. You go to one place and they say, oh, no, 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 you need this form and this form. So you go back over there and get that form. And then you fill it out and you come back to another station and they check it and they say, okay, now go sit over there and get your picture done. And so there's a lot of crossovers. That's what divergence means. And so it's a customized, and the next person comes in and they need their title done. And that, they come into that same first spot, but then they go somewhere else and go back over the other way. And so there's just a lot of crossovers going on and a lot of almost confusion. And so if I'm designing a process that has that situation, then I'm going to need to take all that in consideration when I'm designing the process. And that's what this is trying to get at in this chapter. When it comes to products, I want to embed these 4 dimensions in your mind. I've done a little bit more work with products, and that's variety, flexibility, volume, and skill. So how much variety are your products going to have? Do you just sell the same thing over and over and over again, like gasoline at the Wawa station? That gasoline is pretty much the same, although you can get super and high test and all that. There's 3 different levels of it, but still not a whole lot. It still comes out of the same pump. Flexibility. How much do you want to be able to adjust for your customer? Volume. Are you going to sell one at a time and you're going to make them special for that customer? Or are you going to sell 400 million of them? Or an ultimate volume gasoline where just tens of thousands of gallons are sold every day? And then skill level means what kind of skill does your employee need in order to do that job? So when you're looking at products, and if your company you're working with is primarily a product group, then these are some areas to think about. And I'll give you some examples then. So process types then feed into this, and in a process type we should answer these 4 dimensions. A job shop is one type, and that would be where there's custom work done. A furniture shop, or if you want to look at kind of crossover with services, a doctor's office, a mechanic, an attorney, or an accountant, because each customer comes in and needs something special done, custom. So lots of variety, lots of flexibility. I need to have a chair built, or I need a table built, or I need a desk built. And so lots of variety, some flexibility. Volume is very low, but the skill of the person doing it has to be really high. So they have to be a trained furniture maker. They have to be a trained doctor, a trained auto mechanic, and so forth. Batch. In a batch situation, packaged goods, food, let's think about batch for a minute. A movie theater would be a batch. 60 people come into the theater at 2 o'clock and they paid for their ticket, and we take their money and they all watch the movie and then they all leave. So that's a batch. So they come in, we sell them their ticket, they leave, we clean the auditorium, and the next group comes in. So our volume goes up. Skill level goes down because I don't have a whole lot of interaction with them. I just need to take the ticket and tear it in half. Not a whole lot of training there, no offense, but it's not like having a haircut done. Flexibility, not much flexibility because they come in, I got one movie showing. Variety, not much variety. I only deliver movies. So when you think about these different types, they change, and if I choose the more I move toward get away from job shop, then my costs go down. Now let's go to this other one. There's 2 left. Repetitive. This is where I'm starting to get some some scale benefits, some volume benefits. So if I'm making cheeseburgers at McDonald's, it's repetitive. You put half the roll down, you put the burger on top, you shoot the ketchup on, you shoot the mustard on, you throw the pickles on, you put the diced onions on top, you put the top on it, you wrap it, and it goes. So one after the other, after the other, after the other. So high volume, minimal variety. Think about the McDonald's again. You know, we've got a few food choices, but you can't come in and order a steak. You can't order pancakes in the afternoon, probably. Minimal flexibility, low skill, because I can really focus on what I train the person to do. And that's where we see the wages also go down. Get somebody that's a barber, they're trained, they're going to be making a lot more money than a person who's putting hamburgers and cheeseburgers together at McDonald's. Gasoline station, repetitive. People pull up, cashier charge, let me have your card, which kind of gas do you want, put it in the car. So very repetitive, low skill, don't need a lot of training, high volume, minimal variety, minimal flexibility. So just kind of thinking about what your process is. You should be able to look at your company and say whether it's continuous, repetitive, batch, or job shop. Think about those four different. I'll probably be asking your groups about that. Continuous, this is where we get really extraordinary, ridiculous high volumes. Think about the water that's delivered to your apartment or house. High volume, no variability, no flexibility, low cost per unit. You're paying pennies per gallon or parts of a penny per gallon of water that's delivered to your house. High volume, no variety, no flexibility, extremely low skill or no skill. It might be completely mechanized. And the last comment I'll make on these four is the more we can push our process to look more like repetitive and continuous, the lower our costs go. So think about in days of old when you went to get your taxes done at your local CPA firm, they would sit down with you and go through each document and spend hours working on your tax return, and then you'd come back and they'd give you this big pile of papers. And nowadays we use QuickBooks and we use other software packages, and it's now turned into a repetitive process, and so the cost per tax return goes way down. So over time we have transformed that process using technology, that what used to be a job shop and very expensive and time consuming is now almost repetitive and getting very close to continuous. So the more we can design our processes to push in that direction, our cost of delivering that goes down. All right, Six Sigma process. Here's the big one. This is what you need for this week's discussion question. It's called the DMAIC process. And the concept is that we want extremely high quality in all processes, whether we're making things or we're delivering services. And Six Sigma processes, Six Sigma, as soon as you hear that in a quality context, that means they want no failures. So how can we have a process so airtight that it makes no failures? And this is how you do it. And this chapter wants you to touch on the DMAIC process, the define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. And the concept is, if there is a failure, so someone comes in, they go through their Chipotle line, they go and they sit at their table and they open it, and this burrito has chicken in it instead of steak. Six Sigma would say, okay, stop right there. Let's go through the process. Let's do a root cause analysis and figure out why there's chicken in there instead of steak. And so they go back through the process and analyze each step of the process. And there's some tools I'm going to show you. And by analyzing the process, they figure out what went wrong and they fix it, analyze, improve, and control. And then that error should never, ever occur again. That's what Six Sigma says. Figure out, fix it, and then make sure it never happens again. So define means to say what quality is. So our burrito will always be rolled correctly with the right ingredients inside of it. Everything will be at the right temperature, and it will be wrapped and delivered to the customer. Meets the customer's expectation. In your classes, think about how would you define the quality of a class that you might have. Kind of scary. But you need that definition because we're going to measure the process to the definition. So Six Sigma always starts with define. Measure is what are the measures that you would use to test the quality of this process. Temperature of the burrito, a checklist to say if all the ingredients are in there, a visual inspection with maybe a checklist to say was it wrapped correctly. So what are some measures, 2 or 3 or 4 measures that we could assess the quality of this item or this service? Analyze, and that's what we're going to look at the tools for, is to look through the process and really collect some data on it, not just say, oh, I think some of those burritos are wrong. No, how many burritos? What's wrong? Analyze, and I'll show you the tools on that. There's just a handful of them. Then once you have the analysis, you go back, you fix the process, you improve it, and then you monitor to make sure that those improvements stay. And I know I'm going a little long here, so I'm going to jump to the tools. Number 1 is a check sheet. And it literally is a simple checklist. Those dashes are just counts. So if we had a check sheet, and I've seen them actually doing this over at Panera, they will go out and check the temperature of the coffee in the coffee urns. And she's got a little thermometer, and she knows what a correct temperature range is. That's the define. And she pours some of it in a cup and she sticks the thermometer in it and she writes down the measurement and she puts a check mark. Yes, the temperature is right, or no, the temperature is not right. So a checklist just collects data so we actually know if we're failing quality or we're passing quality. Number 2 is then to take that information and make a Pareto chart. And you can see both of these things we can do in Excel. Almost all of these DMAIC tools can be done in Excel, so it's perfect for us. A Pareto chart is just a categorization of, let's say, the failures. Let's say A is temperature of the burrito, B is how it is wrapped, C is the ingredients, and D is, I don't know, the shell. And the numbers on the side are how many defects of each category did we see. So it's just to show, and what we do is say, oh, most of the defects are A, which is the temperature. Let's go figure out what's wrong with the temperature first, and then we'll work on ingredients, and then we'll work on wrapping, and then we'll work on I don't know what. So it helps us prioritize. The run chart takes this data and maps it over time to see if there's some pattern. You know, is it we have more quality failures at lunchtime than we do dinner time? Or we have more quality failures on Mondays than we do on Tuesdays? And then we can start to figure out what's different between Mondays and Tuesdays, lunch and dinner. So, and again, this is just a simple Excel chart. So we're looking for patterns over time to help us know what to fix. A histogram is another frequency distribution to show we could put temperatures on this, and by looking at this we could see how much the temperatures vary between the burritos. So a histogram is just a frequency by category. It's like a Pareto. They're the same thing, but the Pareto is ranked highest to lowest. The histogram is based on whatever your measure is, time left to right. So histogram and Pareto charts are the same thing. They're just Paretos. You can think of, when you hear Pareto, think priority. It tells you which one to fix first. Flow charts. Once you kind of get some idea of your data, you go through the process. Okay, customer walks in the door. First station, they ask them whether they want a burrito, a bowl, or a taco, and whether they want a wheat shell or not. Then they ask them about the rice. Then they ask them about the meat. Then they ask them about the lettuce, the cheese, right down the line. So we can map out the process. Finally, a scatter diagram. Scatter diagrams, again, they come right out of Excel. They're called an XY diagram, and they let you map together 2 variables, like temperature and time, like trying to think about something else. I can't even think of an example off the top of my head. But it allows you to measure 2 variables and see if there's a pattern. There should not be a pattern. If there's a pattern, that means that's where the problem's coming from. Finally, the control chart. The control chart falls right into my Panera example. where we have an upper control limit, so that's the hottest that coffee should be, and an LCL, that's the coldest the coffee should be. And then each time the manager goes out and measures a cup of coffee, or let's say they do 10 cups of coffee and they average the temperatures together, then they put a dot on here and say, it's still within the range, still within the range. But if you look over on the right, you see they're starting to get closer to the edges. That means we're starting to encounter a problem. The coffee's getting too hot or too cold. So control charts help you do that. But what I'd like you to do as you're going through these with the Cleveland Clinic is be considering which of the tools that they could be using. And I think they specifically talk about one of them that I just mentioned, but it's a video case as well as a written case, and I looked at both and I can't remember all the answers, but they use several of these DMAIC. These are the analysis tools. This is the last one. It's called this one's funny. It's called a cause and effect diagram. It's called an Ishikawa diagram because that's the guy that developed it. And it's also called a fishbone diagram because it does look a little like a fish. And if you look over on the far right, that's the error. So if that's temperature of burritos is the problem, this helps us think through a process. Well, what could be wrong with the temperature of the burrito? And if there's boxes up top, maybe it's the shell temperature. The other box up top, maybe it's the temperature of the meat. Down below, maybe it's the temperature of the rice. Bottom left, you don't have to have all 4 of these boxes filled out, or you could have 6 or 12 boxes, but it's a brainstorming document, and so your team would sit together and you'd say, oh, the problem is that burritos temperature is wrong. What could be causing it? And you list out all the potential causes of that problem. And then you start scratching them out and you go, no, the meat's always perfect. It's not the meat. And you start crossing this off, and whatever you don't cross off, that's the cause. So it's a cause and effect diagram. So the tools of Six Sigma are not that complicated, but you'll see it listed in job descriptions. It's a powerful, powerful tool in business today because quality failures cost you money, and they often cost you customers, and you don't want either of those things to go away, money or customers. So give it a try. I hope that helps prepare you for the case this week.